Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Talking Pictures. I'm your host, Tim Rosenberger, and, we're going to talk about Star Wars again today, and we're going to kind of be talking about the Solo movie from a few months ago. I say kind of because some of you may be wondering, especially since I think I said I was going to do it, why there was not a podcast on the Solo movie. Well, there was a podcast on the Solo movie, but due to some technical difficulties that were mostly, if not entirely, my fault, we recorded it, but then most of it wasn't recorded. So instead of re-recording it again, I decided that my guest and I would wait until the DVD was released, which as we record this was just released a few days ago. And what we're going to do is slightly different than we've done with the Last Jedi podcast and the Rogue One podcast, which we're just going to kind of briefly talk about our thoughts on Solo, just so those are out there and stuff. But then we're going to be mostly talking about, there's a lot of backlash with Solo, and we're going to be kind of talking about that, and then also be talking about the kind of future of the spin-offs. So to talk about all that with me today is returning guest, my friend Andrew. Andrew, thanks for coming back and redoing this.
Hey, my pleasure. You know, any excuse that I can get to talk about Star Wars, I'm all for it. Even if that conversation is repeated, that's fine.
Okay. So it's been, oh God, when did the Solo movie come out now? Was that May?
In May, yeah, end of May, yep.
Okay, so with hindsight, like I said in the intro, as we record this, the DVD, Blu-ray was just released. Have you had a chance to pick that up and watch it since it came out?
I had a chance to pick it up. I have not watched it yet. I did see it 3 times in the theater, though, so my memory's pretty strong on it.
Looking back on it with some months of hindsight, what are your thoughts about the movie?
My initial reaction to it was that it was a lot of fun. I left the theater and I remember thinking that it was nice to have something that wasn't as heavy as The Last Jedi. And while this was a much smaller movie in scope, I think that was actually kind of a good thing. And it was a fun romp. It was, a good heist movie with some Western motifs, and I really enjoyed it. And looking back, I think it's gotten stronger in my mind, particularly the characters and how this movie, while it doesn't really impact the overall scope of the Star Wars universe, it definitely informs some of the films that take place after this, chronologically speaking.
This film, it was more simplified than some of the other ones. I mean, you still have a wide range of characters. They're going to all sorts of different places and stuff. But since it is basically focusing on, because even all the other Star Wars movies, even though the main character is usually kind of Luke or Anakin or Rey for the new ones, they are still focusing on tons of different storylines going on. Like the newer ones, they're focusing on what Rey's doing, what Poe's doing, what Finn's doing,
and they're all in different locations.
But since this one is basically, since it is just about Solo, it is smaller. It's more focused just on him, and then that is, I don't think, I mean, let's see, because the other Star Wars movies haven't really done that. Rogue One obviously didn't really do that. So it's really kind of, I think the first time, not only is this one more simplified than Last Jedi, it's kind of probably the most simplified out of all the theatrical releases, really.
Yeah, easily.
And that's kind of nice to have. I mean, it's a big universe, but to have something more easy to digest is a nice thing to have from that universe, and would be something nice to see more in the future. One of the good things I think this film had going for it was that it had a pretty strong cast for it. The main guy who played Solo, whose name I still can't remember because...
Alden Ehrenreich.
Yes. But then he had Amelia Clarke, Woody Harrelson,
Tandy Newton,
and Paul Bettany, right? It had Donald Glover.
Not to be confused with Danny Glover.
Yeah, I'm saying the right name, right? When I was thinking about the movie today, I actually referred to him in my head as Crispin Glover. I'm like, well, that's a totally different person.
Yeah, that would have been an interesting take on Lando.
Very interested, but... And then some newer people, like Lando has a droid assistant sidekick type person. The actress playing him, who hasn't done tons of stuff from my memory, at least especially not tons of stuff of high profile, but she was good. So it's a very good cast. So it had that going for it. And I think like we mentioned last time, the guy playing Han Solo is playing the character and is doing a good job of kind of in a way echoing Harrison Ford, but he's not doing an impersonation of him. He's still doing his own thing, which is always helps when you're playing a character who's younger. you can kind of use it as an excuse a little bit that he's going to be a bit different. But
the way I like to describe it is he is playing the character of Han Solo. He's not playing Harrison Ford playing Han Solo.
Yeah. Now, it's funny you say that, because when we saw the movie, my wife referred to Donald Glover as Lando as Donald Glover playing Billy D. Williams playing Lando. Because it was such, and not in a bad way, at all, but it very just, he was so much what Billy D. Williams was in Empire Strikes Back. It was kind of scary when you first see him. He's so right on that character. But again, not doing an impersonation, but he's just perfectly
perfectly cast. Perfectly cast.
Yeah. I mean, I know there's rumors of a Lando spinoff, and he did a good enough job that I won't be upset seeing if I can see more of him in that part.
Yeah, I don't know if Lando is interesting enough to hold a movie on his own. I would only go for it if it was a prequel to this one and we got to see him with L3. I don't think that he's got enough. I mean, all he's doing is running schemes and gambling. So that, I mean, I guess it would depend on the story. Because, I wasn't super excited to hear that they were making a Han Solo movie, because I was like, I don't need to see what he was doing before A New Hope. But then I ended up really liking the movie. So, hey, if they want to make a Lando Calrissian movie, my butt will be in the seats.
Well, yes, it's Star Wars. I think that's pretty much a given.
Goes without saying, pretty much, right?
Well, I mean, here's a kind of a side question. Could they make a Star Wars movie that you would not see? Like, you wouldn't even give it a shot? Would that even be possible for you?
No, I don't think so. I mean,
the Ewok Jar Jar Binks movie,
that would actually be amazing. I would be down for that in a heartbeat. Oh man, now you've got my mind reeling on what that would be and how that would work. Why don't you write up a story treatment and send it over to Lucasfilm, see what they say.
Well, that would be better than some of the stuff they put out. That's beside the point. So, yeah, because we've talked about before in some of the other podcasts how ever since this news came out that they were making a Solo movie, you were very reluctant about them making it because you didn't feel like they needed to make one, and what they say about him in New Hope is enough for you. So you're more on board with it now than you were before you saw the movie then?
Yeah, definitely. I'm on board with it to the point where I'm saddened that we may not see a sequel to it. I left the theater thinking, well, I wouldn't mind seeing that group together again, and of course the obvious hook at the end of the movie really makes me want to see more of where they wanted to go with that.
Why don't we just dive into that? For people who still haven't seen the movie, well, one, just go see the movie.
See the movie.
It's out now. I'm sure it's streaming somewhere on Amazon or somewhere. So just go out and buy the thing or rent it or get it from the library or something. Anyway, but just in case you haven't, since it's only been a few months, there will be a spoiler section here if you don't want to hear it. So yeah, that Darth Maul thing. In the first podcast we did on Star Wars, we talked about the spin-off stuff from Clone Wars. He's brought back in that, and he has this recurring storyline throughout these parts of that show. And I think, was he also in Rebels too?
He was, yep.
Yeah, I think he fought old Obi-Wan because he has this kind of long-standing thing with Obi-Wan in the Clone Wars and in Rebels a little bit. So I wondered, for people who have seen those shows or who have just seen the movies, even Rogue One and stuff like that, I do wonder how confusing that might have been just to suddenly see Darth Maul, who last time most people would have seen him, he was cut in half and he fell down in a bottomless pit on a ship or whatever the hell that was. One
of the nice things about the fact that this is several months later is that I've had plenty of time to talk to people, and some of the folks at work that didn't know that he was still alive in the Clone Wars, their reaction was, that was really cool seeing Darth Maul at the end. I didn't understand it until I went online and looked it up on Wikipedia, but it was really cool seeing him. Yeah, I think that in this day and age, we're living in the world of comic book movies. Even if Star Wars isn't, based on a comic book, we've got that mentality of, there's a really big reveal, and that's a big twist, and it's going to lead into the next movie, right? And I feel like a lot of people aren't as impacted by the Darth Maul reveal as some of the people in the know wondered about. Because if we're being honest, they shouldn't have killed Darth Maul off in the first place. If people can agree on one thing about the Phantom Menace, it's that Darth Maul is awesome.
He is.
he's an incredible character design. He's got incredible swordsmanship and martial arts moves.
Yeah, his best lightsaber fights in any of the movies.
Yeah, and so if people see him on the screen, even if they don't know why or how he's still alive, I think the fact that he's awesome is going to overwrite their confusion, and they're just going to, go online and look it up on Wikipedia to see what happened.
The thing you mentioned about superhero movies is a good point, and I'll go further with that, saying that not only have people have gotten used to maybe hooks at the end of movies that lead into another movie in that particular franchise or in another movie in that same universe, but I think because of all the Marvel stuff and sort of DC stuff, kind of, we've gotten used to something being in a movie or TV show and then appearing in somewhere else.
Yeah, it's all connected.
And knowing that, there's more about this and that other thing. I think that does help. And yes, and of course the internet helps, so if people are confused, they can just kind of Google it. And yes, Darth Maul is awesome. And for people who haven't seen him in the Clone Wars, and I haven't got to see his Rebels storyline, but in the Clone Wars, and if you want to see a more detailed discussion about this, go watch the first podcast we did. A benefit of having him in more of those movies would have been to expand his character, because in episode 1 he has a few lines, and he doesn't seem like much of a thinker. He just seems more like a guy you send after somebody to get them killed quickly. So in the Clone Wars stuff, they really expand on why Darth Sidious would want him as an apprentice, why he would be a really good apprentice, not just for his skills fighting, but also he's has a good mind too. So if they do make a solo more on these solo movies, it will be nice to see one where they go with him in general, but then how they expand on that, and to see more of that kind of thinker mentality in the movies would be very interesting. And I forget, I know we talked about this when we did this the first time, but is it the same well, I say actors because somebody did the physical part and did the voice. Is it the same people that did it in Phantom Menace?
Yes and no. So it's the same actor on screen. It's Ray Park who's on screen. So he came back to reprise his role. The voice is not the same voice that did Darth Maul in the Phantom Menace, but it is the same actor who voiced him in the Clone Wars and Rebels, which makes sense to me because he's got a lot more built up into that character than the other guy. Yeah.
Sorry, other guy.
Yeah.
I thought you did fine, but
the voice actor is Sam Witwer, and he's a huge Star Wars fan, and so like he was actually giving them information about Darth Maul, like what lightsaber hilt he should be using at that point in his history, and he's a big nerd like me.
I guess we have to just touch on briefly Chewbacca and Han in the movie. Now, I felt like they could have maybe done a little bit more with Chewbacca in the movie, because they seemed to focus more on Han's relationship with Emilia Clarke's character and Lando, which I understand to a degree, especially Emilia Clarke, since his character in that movie has a long history with her, and they come from the same planet, and they're sort of love interests and blah, blah, blah. But since Chewie and Han are such buddies, I was hoping to see more of them, and I wonder if part of the reason they might have maybe not used Chewie as much was because Chewie can't speak English, and hearing a lot of Wookiee speak can get kind of frustrating.
Yeah, I think that there was enough of their budding friendship. There were little looks that Chewbacca would give where you can see him kind of measuring the character of Han Solo, and there's the point in the movie where they're about to leave Kessel during the riot, and Chewie has the choice to either stay with Han Solo or leave with his fellow Wookiees, and at that point he makes the clear decision that he needs to stay with Han Solo, whereas earlier in the movie he is telling Beckett's crew that he wants to go help his tribe, and here when he makes that decision he's saying that Han Solo is his tribe now, and he's making the choice to not go with his literal tribe, but to stick with Han, which is kind of an interesting choice.
No, yeah, and it is a good moment, and in a way it makes sense, because you would think, especially if you know the more of the spin-off stuff and the backstory behind what happened to Kashyyyk, his home planet, why is he not helping more other Wookiees out, and kind of why is he just with Han the whole time? You think he would want to be helping his people during such a difficult time. So yeah, to see him make that choice is really good, and it is a very touching moment. I mean, that whole sequence with him and the Wookiees is very powerful. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying they don't use Chewie at all. He's in the movie a lot. I just wish they did a little bit more with him and Solo, but they do a lot. They do a very good job in this movie, and they did a good job in Force Awakens and Last Jedi of doing a lot of just physical acting with body movement and what he's doing with his head and stuff like that. Especially since, I mean, that's not a terribly mobile mask he has, so you really can't do tons with it. They do.
And man, does he do some serious action in this movie too? Like picking guys up and throwing them and slamming their heads into the floor. And it's the most active that we've seen him in any of the movies.
Oh, I guess probably any of the movies really, but especially
any of the other movies, all he's doing is running around shooting a blaster, right?
Yeah.
You get to actually see his brutality when it comes to attacking people that he doesn't really agree with.
So I think everybody did a good job in the movie. Paul Bettany's not the greatest villain, but it's not his fault. It's just, it's not a great villain. The future of Emilia Clarke's character would be interesting. I think she might make more of a interesting baddie, kind of conflicted good bad baddie for Solo. It'd be interesting to see what they do with her. I would love to see more Chewie and Han, especially since they're now together. They're by themselves on the Falcon, so it'd be great to see more of them. If they didn't do a Lando movie but had him more in these Solo movies in some sort of supporting way, that would be great. Would there be
I'd really like to see more of, like we know that Han and Chewie are friends, but at the end of Solo, Han and Lando are nowhere near as friendly with each other as they are in Empire Strikes Back. And so, like, they have to go on other adventures at some point.
Oh, yeah.
In order to build up some sort of camaraderie, in order for their friendship in Empire to make any sense.
Yeah, and I always felt, I think there's always going to be a sort of love-hate thing with them anyway, because it seems, I think, even in Empire, that they are friendly and they do like each other and they would, fight for each other, but at the same time, they do...
Han stole his girl.
Yeah, and they still get annoyed with each other and probably hate each other some of the time still.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned the last time we did this, because in the movie, after they do the Kessel Run, the ship gets banged up to hell, basically. Yeah. You mentioned a good point that in Empire, when you first see Lando, his first question is basically, what have you done to my ship?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what have you done to it now?
Yeah. Again. Still destroying it. Yep.
It'd be interesting if they do that for every movie. If they did more of these, every movie, the ship just gets banged to hell. It would make Han's line in Return of the Jedi about "don't get a scratch on it" kind of pretty funny.
Yeah.
Because all Lando does is the radar dish, the dish thing gets knocked off. Solo, half the ship gets destroyed.
It's gone.
But yeah, more of Han and Lando would be great, or at least some indication that they are having adventures off screen. Because otherwise, it would be kind of odd. Because for what Han says of Lando in Empire, it doesn't seem like he hasn't seen him in 20, 30 years or whatever. So it'd be kind of odd if that was literally the last time they saw each other until Cloud City. And if they did do more Solo movies, anything you'd want to see them do or improve on?
I'd be interested on knowing more about Enfys Nest and her Marauders, her group of rebels or whatever they are. I'd be interested to see more of them, because I think that she was more interesting than Paul Bettany's character was, and she ended up not really being a villain, but I love her design, and the idea behind it I think is very interesting. So it'd be neat to see what exactly their role is in the shaping of, like, are they going to roll into the Rebel Alliance? Are they off doing their own thing and never join up with any other Rebel cells? It'd be interesting to know more about them.
If they did more, I wouldn't mind Ron Howard coming back. I don't know if he would.
I wouldn't either.
But I think, like I've said, I think before, he's a great director. In my opinion, one of the best directors working today. There were problems with Solo, but I think they were mainly not his fault. They were mainly writing problems, or just because the production had such problems, because they changed directors
it's like 2 weeks before they were done filming,
which just seems
reshot like 85% of the film,
which just seems irresponsible to me on a money sense, but whatever. I'm not Disney, they can do what they want with their franchise. But yeah, I wouldn't mind Ron Howard coming back, and he did shoot the movie in a very interesting way. You mentioned that, and I hadn't noticed this until you mentioned it, but that there's more color in the film as it goes on. Was that what you said?
It starts off and you're on Corellia and it's all dark and dark blues, and then they go outside of Corellia and everything is gray and cloudy. They go on the train heist and everything is white because of the snow, and gray and cloudy skies. And then they get to Corellia and there's more color, there's some more oranges and stuff mixed in. And then when they get to the planet at the end, Savareen, then you've got the ocean, you've got the blues, and you've got the earth tones of the sand, and the color in the movie, I think it shifts throughout, which is really interesting. And while I didn't have time to watch the movie movie itself. I did watch some of the bonus features. One thing that they talked about was how Han Solo's journey through this film is very much like the old Western days, moving from the East Coast and then traveling out to have adventures out west. So you start off in this really urban industrial area, and then he decides he wants to get out of there and go have adventures. And so he, like a good old fashioned American cowboy, finds a horse and takes it out west. And at the end, the location where they shot Sovereign is the locations where they shot a lot of those old John Wayne Westerns, is in that same area. So it all ties in.
You say that, and it almost seems like because people always say, I mean, there's obvious connections, especially if you know anything about George Lucas's thought process behind Star Wars in the first place. There's obvious connections to Samurais and Akira Kurosawa's work and those types of films. But there also seems, I don't think this is mentioned, and I just thought of it, maybe other people have and you have, but that there also seems to be a very strong connection to Westerns too.
Yeah.
With Solo and what they want to do. Well, I don't know if they actually said they want to do this or if this is just a rumor of what fans want, but at least what the rumor of what people wanted to see what happened with an Obi-Wan Kenobi movie.
Yep, that's what I wanted.
Oh, yeah. Fingers crossed. But so, yeah, that's a very interesting thing that they do that. Now, do we think that they're going to actually make more Solo movies? Because this didn't. Did it actually make a good amount of money, or did he?
No. So it didn't, and it's considered by the industry as a box office bomb in air quotes. I looked it up. It made just under 400 million at the box office globally, and the estimates were that it needed 500 million to break even. Now, granted, part of that is the fact that they shot the thing twice, right? So their budget had to have increased significantly when that happened. They had a $275 million budget, and it should not have. This is, like we said at the beginning, this is not a big film. This isn't large in scope. It should not have cost $275 million.
I mean, it's still a Star Wars. Yeah, it's still a Star Wars movie, but yeah, it doesn't need.
Right.
It's a matter of, I think Hollywood, they need to learn how to budget movies better and to be more efficient with budgets.
Well, and so by comparison, I've always kind of compared this movie to Star Wars's version of Ant-Man. You've got these great big, sweeping epic movies, and then you've got Ant-Man, much smaller in scale and everything. And I looked it up just because I was curious, and that movie had a production budget of only 130 million.
Only.
Yeah, only 130 million. Well, I'm comparing it to the 275 of Solo, and it made worldwide 500 million, just over 500 million. The problem was what happened with Solo was it did not do well overseas at all. It was projected to do a lot better than it actually did overseas, and I'm not sure why that is, but that was where they took the big hit, was overseas.
How did Rogue One do? Because I wonder if Rogue One.
It did a lot better.
Yeah, I wonder almost if people saw Rogue One over there, didn't like it as much, and then when Solo came out, they didn't watch it because of Rogue One.
It made a ton of money. So domestic, it made 532 million. Foreign, this is just foreign, it made 523 million. So worldwide,
a lot.
Over $1 billion.
Okay, so yeah, I did a lot better.
It's not even in the same league.
No. So yeah, Solo didn't do terribly well, and there was also, ignoring the box office stuff of it, and overall the movie for me was fine. I was not crazy about it. I liked parts of it a lot, but it's certainly not my favorite Star Wars movie, but I think it should have done better in the box office than it did. I think people were unfairly bashing it, because when I saw the movie, I had heard all this stuff about how it wasn't very good, and I saw it and I didn't understand why people were being so harsh on it. So yeah, it didn't do as well in the box office as I think it should have. I'm not saying it should have been the highest grossing Star Wars film ever or anything, but it should have done better than it did. I think it deserved that. But also, ignoring the box office, it had a lot of backlash online and a lot of people criticizing it for very different reasons. People started criticizing Kathleen Kennedy, and who I think is giving the finger to them now, considering
they are.
Now she's going to be there for at least a few more years. How did you feel about all that hoopla going on at the time?
Well, so there were a couple things that were happening around that time in the fandom. One was the backlash from The Last Jedi was still ongoing.
I don't know what you're talking about. Everybody loved that movie.
Yeah. And so I think a lot of people, I think a lot of it is just it's a very vocal minority. I guarantee the people that were saying this, they still went and saw the movie, right?
Yeah.
Like, they still went and saw the movie. So I think a lot of it was more reaction to the initial box office, and people were just saying, oh, well, this just proves that Star Wars is dead. Kathleen Kennedy has destroyed the brand. Fire Kathleen Kennedy. All this other nonsense. And then there was other stuff that was going on. The whole Kelly Marie Tran thing that happened where she left Twitter because she was being harassed online about her role in The Last Jedi. And Star Wars fandom has really made me loathe Star Wars fandom. Just because there are some not nice people out there, and they use the fandom as a way to attack other people, and it's really frustrating to me. But anyway, I've gotten to the point where I'm pretty numb to people's criticisms of Star Wars movies. I mean, I remember back in 1999 when The Phantom Menace came out, and I saw that in the theater probably 8 times. It wasn't fantastic. It wasn't a great movie. There were things about it that really annoyed me, but when I started hearing people talk about how Jar Jar Binks is a racist character and how he's destroying Star Wars and ruining Star Wars and George Lucas is killing my childhood and all this stuff, I was surprised because I had a good time at that movie. So I'm kind of numb to it these days. And when The Last Jedi happened and all the hate that was thrown around for that movie, which I think is not warranted,
No. Or at least not to that degree of harassment and stuff.
Yeah, I just stopped listening to it. I mean, it is what it is. People have the right to dislike a movie if they so choose. I prefer to watch a movie and try to find the things that I like about it. Mm-hmm. If there's nothing that I like about it, then I'll say that I didn't like the movie, but I try to like a movie. I think a lot of these people are going into Star Wars movies now looking to pick it apart, looking to find a reason to hate it. And that's not the right way to go see a movie.
Yeah, or I think maybe sometimes they're going in with too high of expectations, even though there have been missteps obviously in just ignoring spin-off stuff and cartoons and all that stuff. There have been missteps just in the theatrical films, even if they're just minor missteps within certain movies. But I think people are still going into those movies with too high of expectations and expecting perfection and not getting it, or going into it, especially with the sequel movies 7, 8, and 9, going into them because of the expanded universe stuff, which isn't in continuity anymore. They're getting too pissy about the fact that they're not doing the stuff that was in, which I understand that, but I understand the reasons why they didn't do that too. But I think they're just being too like, no, you have to do it the way we want you to do it, and you're not. So we're gonna be bad people online.
I heard an interesting analogy the other day where it was, people, and it's to that point where people go in expecting the movie to be the way that they want it, and they come out saying, well, if I had done it, I would have done this, and they should have done this. This would have been better. If you go to a museum and you look at a piece of art, do you sit there and go, you know what? I would have done it better. I totally would have, made that sculpture look more lifelike, or I would have made that sculpture with, 6 fingers instead of 5 because it would have been more interesting and would have raised more questions. I mean, I don't do that. I go to a museum and I appreciate the art. I feel like the internet has made everybody a critic, and some people should not be critics because they don't go in with a critical mind. They go in with a pessimistic mind.
They go in with the mind that I think Hollywood, not everybody, but certain Hollywood people, actors, directors, writers, think that all critics go into movies with, which they think all critics go into it saying, like, how can I hate this movie, or how can I destroy this movie, or whatever, which, if there are critics who do that, professional and not professional, but the good ones don't. And yeah, there are a lot of people who just, I don't know, they just love the original movies, and they want to find reasons why every other movie is terrible.
They're they're wanting to go to a movie, and they're wanting to have the exact same feeling they had when they were 10 and they saw these movies for the first time. And you're not going to get that because you're 40 now. So I don't know.
Well, and also, even if, let's say, Rian Johnson or Abrams or Lucas or, whoever directed a Star Wars movie or any movie, even if they make certain things that are mistakes or problems or are things that they shouldn't be doing because they're better directors than that, everybody needs to keep in mind that it's very easy for somebody to go see a finished movie and say what's wrong with it. It's totally different to actually be in the midst of it and making the movie and think what's wrong with it, because you're in the middle of it. It's harder to be, one, you're making it, so it's harder to be objective about it. And also, since you're in the middle of it, you can't see it with as fresh of eyes as somebody who is just coming into it. So Rian Johnson or Ron Howard, they might, if they had like months just to sit on the film and then go back to it, they might have been, okay, that's a problem, that's a problem, that's a problem. We'll fix that. But they can't do that because you have to release movies on certain times, and that you don't have that luxury.
And not only that, but the people who are going and watching the movie have not had the same life experiences that the director and the filmmakers and the screenwriters have had that informed their decision making in why they wanted the story to go a particular way. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's the story they're telling. I mean, yes, it's a part of a Star Wars, especially as a part of a greater franchise, and in a way, a lot of people share it. But Rian Johnson is telling his own story in his own personal way. Abrams is doing that. Lucas is doing that. They're all doing their own thing and telling their own personal story. So of course, it's going to be different than what such and such fan was. Now, maybe that fan seeing it, maybe they would have done a movie that would have been in some way better. But you aren't the one who made the movie, so
exactly.
So it's just deal with it. They had different choices. Yes, it's heartbreaking in certain ways. I've seen movies or follow-ups on movies that I thought, well, that could have been better. I really wish that had been better. But at the end of the day, again, I wasn't the one making it at the time. I'm not that person. You have to trust your own instincts as a filmmaker. You can't second-guess yourself, because then you really are going to run into problems. So if it turns out that those instincts are later wrong, then, well, they're wrong, and you try to do better the next time. But you don't... who's ever listening to this, if you go into a movie, just try to keep some of that in mind.
Go into it optimistic that it's going to be an entertaining experience, good or bad, however the movie is. Just look for the entertainment in it. You're going to, for the joy of seeing a movie on a giant screen with really loud speakers.
And just keep in mind, movies are really, really, really hard to make, and they take a lot of work. So
I haven't made one because it's just too darn hard.
Yeah.
If it was easier, I would have made one by now. Sure.
So, in other spin-off news, as we record this, recent-ish, I think the past couple weeks or so, Disney announced, I think because of, probably at least partially because of how Solo did, they are slowing down their production of the spin-off stuff. Am I remembering that right?
Well, so it was an interview with The Hollywood Reporter with Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney. And I'm just going to warn everybody out there in the internet that unless you have read the Hollywood Reporter article, don't believe anything you've read or seen reporting what Disney is doing with any of the Star Wars movies. I've seen so many clickbait articles where it's saying, Rian Johnson's been fired. They're stopping all production on the spin-off movies. No, just stop, people. Just stop. So basically what it was, they talk about a whole bunch of stuff in this interview. A lot of it's talking about the evolution of distribution and going towards the Disney streaming service and all that. But there was a question about whether Disney should, quote, pump the brakes on Star Wars movies. And Bob Iger basically said that he takes the blame for the timing. Now, he doesn't go into any specifics about what timing he's talking about. If he's talking about whether it's a movie a year, whether he's talking specifically about Solo coming out only 5 months after The Last Jedi. He doesn't go into specifics about what timing he's talking about, but he does say that the timing was a mistake. And he also says, and I'm quoting, that doesn't mean we're not going to make films. J.J. Abrams is busy making Episode 9. We have creative entities, including the Game of Thrones creators David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, who are developing sagas of their own. So to me, it just sounds like they're reevaluating how quickly they're going to put these out. And again, I don't know if nobody knows other than Bob Iger if that means that they aren't going to have them 5 months apart or if it means that they're not going to have them once a year. He does not give any specifics. And if you read any article other than the Hollywood Reporter article, you're going to get the impression that there are specifics, and that's just not the case.
Well, I'll say this. If it's a matter of slowing down in the sense of having either more time between movies or just giving movies more time in pre-production and stuff. I mean, I think giving them more time in pre-production to kind of work on stuff, I think that's would probably be a good thing, because just because, again, or rarely ever it's a good thing when you rush stuff out just to make a predetermined release dates, because then you cut corners or you start filming something before the script is ready, which rarely works out. So just having more time is almost always better. So if he wants to do that, to give them time to work on scripts, to do whatever, I think that is a step in the right direction. And again, not that I liked Rogue One, Han Solo was fine, so I'm not saying those were total disasters that they need to really do a desperate rethink of all their spin-offs, but I'd rather they take their time and focus on the quality of the stuff and not on quantity, because I'm always for that, quality over quantity, because it doesn't do you any good if you have a lot of crap.
Yeah, I agree. I think when everybody was posting this article and all the other articles to my timeline on Facebook, my initial post that I would comment on their questions to me was good, right? Like, this isn't a bad thing.
No.
They're wanting these movies to be as good as they can, and they're wanting them to make as much money as they can. I mean, that's the real reason that they're doing this, is to make money. And they saw that Solo didn't do that, and whether that was a question of content, if people just didn't want to see a movie about Han Solo, or if it was a question of timing, or if it was a question of, all the bad press that movie got with all the change of directors and everything. Who knows? But I don't see this as being a bad thing. The other thing that I would mention is the Disney streaming service that I was talking about. They're also ramping up stuff for that. There's a TV show that Jon Favreau is directing and working on that's going to be on the streaming service. There's rumors of a cartoon that's going to be on the streaming service exclusively. So that's another avenue that they can do this. And I find it very interesting that it's been reported that there's going to be, in the Marvel world, there's going to be a TV show on the streaming service focused on Scarlet Witch, and another one focused on Loki. And so those are pulling big characters from the movies and putting them on a streaming service. Who's to say they couldn't do the same thing with some of these previously planned spin-off movies and just shift the distribution to being on the streaming service?
Or even instead of doing Solo as movies, do it as a show or something. Especially since, I mean, if they can afford Tom Hiddleston in a streaming thing, they can afford
Alden Ehrenreich.
I'm sorry. If by any small chance you listen to this, I'm sorry. I'm just terrible with names. I barely remember anybody's name. But anyway, I mean, he obviously is not as big of a name as Tom Hiddleston is, so they could do that. None of those actors I can think of. Yeah, because Emilia Clarke does television with Game of Thrones, obviously. So none of those actors would be hard, especially since all the big name people who might cost a lot, who might run into problems with a TV budget, could be people who could be recurring characters, so you wouldn't even need them around all the time. Donald Glover.
He would be the hard one just for scheduling, because that guy is everywhere all the time. I mean, he's got, his show Atlanta. He's got the Childish Gambino.
There's a chance maybe in the future he might be because he had a cameo in the Spider-Man movie.
Right.
Might see more of him in that.
That guy's incredibly busy, so getting a schedule locked down for him to do an ongoing TV show might be difficult. But everybody else, I think.
Yeah, and again, if you want Lando in that, you could have him guest star every
like
an episode.
Yep.
Whatever. That would not be as hard as doing. Yeah, I mean, I don't think he could do an ongoing Lando show or something. But yeah, that is a good point. Yeah, they could switch some of that stuff over to that.
Lando, it could be like a sitcom. It ended up being like The Love Boat with Lando as the captain. Oh, yeah. Again, we should write this stuff down and send it to Lucasfilm.
Oh, I'm sure they would well, I mean, they produced. Well, I say that, but no. I would say they did. The Star Wars Holiday Special does exist, but that's not released in any kind of official format anymore. So, yeah, though it would have to be better than that.
I would hope so.
I would hope so, unless we make all the other side characters except for Lando Wookiees, and who watch weird videos on holographic imagery.
Yes. Not appropriate for children.
Appropriate for children at all. And B. Arthur can have a cameo.
Yeah. Whipster.
So yeah, the Disney service, I do worry. I mean, of all the streaming service stuff, like people have pointed out, and I think I've we might have pointed out in one of the other podcasts, there's always a worry that since all these people wanting to do streaming services, that they're going to there's going to be too many, because
oversaturate the market.
Yeah, people can't afford all the streaming stuff, so that might cause a problem. But if anybody besides like Netflix and Hulu and stuff can make it work, I mean, Disney, I mean, it has, I mean, obviously all those movies people love, just the older stuff, and then, Star Wars and the Marvel stuff and all that, it will help give people reason to want to check it out.
They've got such a huge catalog, right?
Like, especially after buying Fox.
Right, and you've got, all your television shows from ABC, because that's owned by Disney, so they could pull all that stuff off of Netflix and Hulu, wherever it's currently available, have it exclusively on their own streaming service, because that would make sense from a marketing standpoint, and that's going to draw a lot of people because people want to be able to see that stuff.
And I think they're doing that for their stuff that wasn't exclusively made with Netflix. So, like, to do the Marvel example, I think they'll probably do that with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. They would not do that with stuff like Daredevil or Jessica Jones.
I've heard that stuff is staying.
Because and that makes sense because it was made with Netflix, and with Hulu, that Runaway show, I'm assuming that would stay on too, because again, that was made with Hulu, unless they made some sort of deal. But yeah, most of the other stuff that was just on TV, then they put it on Netflix without Netflix's involvement. Otherwise, yeah, we'll probably go to the Disney streaming service when that gets up and running. So what would you, because I mean, obviously you don't want to wait too long in between these movies. What would you think would be a kind of a good release schedule for how often to do these movies if they kept doing the spinoffs?
That's a tough question. That is a hard question, because on the one hand, when they said they were doing more Star Wars movies, before they had said what the schedule was going to be, that there was going to be one a year, there were rumors floating around that there were going to be every other year, which ended up being correct for the saga stories, the episodic ones.
Which is a good idea.
I kind of balked at it, and maybe it's because I'm a traditionalist and I'm a crotchety old man now, but I was like, well, Star Wars movies come every 3 years. Like, that's the rule. That's the way it should be. You've got 3 years to build up hype and get excited for it. But on the other hand, the reason it's a hard question is because I want more Star Wars. I love watching Star Wars in the movie theater, and I'm not going to live forever, and so I want to be able to see as many as I possibly can. The other thing is that we've had 4 movies, one a year for 4 years, and none of them have been spread apart longer than a full year. And so the next year and a half, the year and a half between Solo and Episode 9 is going to feel like forever.
Yeah.
It's going to feel really long. So I don't know. I'd be fine if they did one a year, or if they did one every 2 years. I think there's no way that they're going to do one every 3 years, because Disney wants their money.
But it would be, because you do make a good point, just thinking about how long, by the time we finally get to Episode 9, not just because, 2 reasons. One, it'll be in such a long time since it was a Star Wars movie. Well, again, I say such a long time.
Such a long time.
But compared to what we've had lately, the beginning of lately, it will be a long time. But also, I mean, obviously, it's going to be the end of not just that trilogy, but as long as they don't continue it with 10, 11, 12, whatever, it will be the end of 9 films. So there's going to be a lot of how they end it, and, so there's going to be a lot of hype around that. And so, yeah, I mean, I would almost say 2 years might be better, because by the time you get to that, every time, at least I would see it, it would be more exciting because I've had to wait a long time instead of...
Yeah, the other thing that I think has kind of been a problem for them is the fact that they're doing the episodic movies every other year, and then in between those, they're doing these standalone movies that don't tie in with the other movies that are currently out. They tie in with the original trilogy. And so, a lot of people are like, well, Marvel puts out 2 to 3 movies a year. Why can't Star Wars do that? Well, it's a totally different beast. You've got, the reason they can do it is because they've got so many characters, and those characters are so different that they can do multiple of those in a year, and then every couple of years bring them all together. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the other movies that they're planning, because Benioff and Weiss, the Game of Thrones guys that are doing their movies, when that was announced, it was announced that they were doing their own series of movies. It wasn't specific to, we're doing 2 movies, we're doing 3, a trilogy of movies. It was a series of movies. So it'll be interesting to see how that fleshes out. and assuming that the Rian Johnson movies are still going forward, that's a trilogy of movies. So will those two series interlink with each other? Will they be totally separate from each other? It's easy for us to say now that every 2 years or every 3 years would be fine. If their vision is to make them more of an interconnected, ongoing movie experience, I could see it where one a year would be fine as long as they take place chronologically, which I know goes against everything George Lucas ever did with his storytelling, but I could see them going that route, and I think that that would be perfectly acceptable.
Yeah, and I think those would, I forget which one, if it was Rian Johnson or the Game of Thrones guys. I think it was probably the Game of Thrones guys, but it seemed to be kind of like they were going to do their own kind of new saga almost, which I think would be, if that would be like the main thing in replacement of the original stuff, original saga, that would be, I think, a good compromise, because I don't want to see, I don't want to see episode 15 or something.
Well, we're gonna get that, but it's gonna be 20 years from now. Right, 30 years from now, we'll get episode. It's gonna happen. It's the marketing machine. That's why we got episode 9.
Well, but
or that's why, and 8 and 7, right? Like that's.
But I don't know. I think people feed on nostalgia, and 20 years from now, the people who were kids when The Force Awakens comes out in the current movies, they're going to want to see what happened to Rey and Finn and Poe, and so you're going to get that 10, 11, after
12,
a certain point,
20
though.
Years.
I know, but I know that there's a strong possibility it can happen and stuff. I'm just hoping it doesn't. But I mean, part of the reason is just because I had heard rumors about them doing a 7, 8, and 9 for a long, long time. So it wasn't like that was totally just out of left field. There's rumors that, well, I mean, he didn't, but that Lucas had planned 7, 8, and 9 and stuff. There
were also rumors I remember growing up where it was also 10, 11, 12.
But I think he mentioned something, because I saw some old interview or an excerpt from it. It said that like 7, 8, 9 would continue the story, 20 years later, whatever, after the original movies. But then he did mention like specifically spin-offs for like 3 more movies. So I don't know necessarily if those were going to be 10, 11, 12 or just, I don't know.
Who knows with that man? He's said so many different things over the years.
Yeah, I know.
You can't believe a word that man says.
But anyway, I like the idea of just end that story at a certain point, especially since it's so connected to the Skywalker stuff. I don't know how you could keep that going and going and going and going, because after a certain point...
Well, the Skywalker saga is supposedly ending with 9, which has me believing that, right now Kylo Ren's the last of the Skywalker lineage. So I suspect that this will be his last movie in some way, shape, or form. And so then 10, 11, 12 would be the continuation of the non-Skywalkers.
But then is that really the same thing, though? Because the saga is always focused on Skywalkers, so you almost might as well make it a new saga at that point.
That's just because there's been Skywalkers alive during those time periods, right?
Yeah. My thing is, if you're just going to make it non-Skywalker, just make it its own thing. Have it be what the Game of Thrones people are doing. So you still have a saga. It's just not...
Right.
It's not...
But what I'm saying is that there's going to be a 10, 11, and 12, and that it's going to not be about the Skywalkers unless they find that there was some other lost Skywalker lineage somewhere. But
I'm going to write a very nasty letter to you now online and harass you because of these opinions. Now, again, it might
block you like I do everybody else.
It might happen at some point. If it does, I don't know. I'll be grumpy about it. But I'll give it a shot.
I'm not saying that I agree with it. I'm just saying that that's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah, it's mainly, it's part of a, I don't know, it's a part of a weird thing where it's just, I don't know. I don't want to be like sitting my daughter down and watch Star Wars. Okay, this is one of 25 films, not including the spin-offs. It's just, I don't know. It just seems wrong for Star Wars. Almost any other franchise, I'd be fine with it, but Star Wars, I don't know.
It's too precious.
Yeah, and it's just, I don't know. And again, it's this whole discussion we had originally about it being...
I think a lot of it's probably because, it used to be special because there weren't many. It wasn't an ongoing thing. For the longest time, we just had 3. Right? And so it was very special. It was a very special moment in time when those 3 movies came out, and then there was suddenly 6. And then it was special because at that point we thought it was over and, that was the end. And so I think that's probably what it is that we're just so used to it being so limited, and now all of a sudden it's opened wide up, and you've got TV shows that link in with everything, and you've got spin-off movies that link in, and it's like the Marvel movies now, right? Like when I start showing my kids the Marvel movies, there's already 20 of them.
Yeah.
Right? There's 20 of them. and they've only been around for 10 years.
And that's only counting the universe ones.
Right, and so it's going to end up being the same thing. It's just going to get where there's just you have to pick one franchise, and that's the only franchise you can ever go see in the movie theater.
Is there anything in particular out of all of the spin-off stuff, the streaming stuff, the possible movie stuff that they've had rumored, the Lando, Kenobi stuff, is there anything in particular that you would most like to see?
The thing that I'm most interested to see is whatever Rian Johnson's doing, that trilogy of movies. I think that The Last Jedi was a very smart movie, and I think that Rian Johnson is an incredibly intelligent man and really knows how to get performances and how to frame a scene, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does outside of that Skywalker saga. As far as rumored stuff, as I mentioned, would love to see a Obi-Wan Kenobi movie.
Oh, God.
I would love to see that.
I would love, again, especially if they do a Western Clint Eastwood type Man with No Name thing. Yep. That would be. And I think I've mentioned this before, but the good thing about the Obi-Wan stuff is you have a lot of time to do that, because you really don't. You can set it almost at any time, so Ewan McGregor can age a lot. I mean, after a certain point, it might get a little ridiculous, because at a certain point he needs to look like
Alec Guinness. Yeah,
like Alec Guinness. So you can only do that so much, or unless you just want to ignore it. But they have a lot of time to do it, and he said, I think in pretty much any Star Wars interview he's ever done, to the point of he's probably very, very annoyed by it, but that he wants to do it. Yeah. It's just a matter of them asking them and them getting behind it. So yeah, I'm most looking forward to the Obi-Wan thing. I do look forward to Rian Johnson doing more stuff, because not just because of the stuff you said, but also because he did do so many fresh things with Last Jedi, and some of the stuff I probably didn't like, but a lot of the stuff I did like. So I would like to see him do that more, see more of the stuff he would do, more of the spins he would put on the stuff we're familiar with would be great. Yeah. But we'll see how far that goes. I mean, I think that's all a long ways away.
Yeah.
But we can wait, and we have episode 9 to possibly look forward to, I guess.
Right.
But...
Well, that's the other thing, is that I almost guarantee we'll have 2 years between episode 9 and whatever comes after that. They're going to want that to breathe, and they're not going to want to market anything ahead of episode 9. They're not going to want to announce specifics about movies or anything ahead of episode 9, because they're going to want to put all their focus and all the spotlight on that movie.
So before we wrap things up, people who listen to this podcast in general and listen to the other 2 Star Wars themed podcasts that we've done for this show know that we usually end with some sort of recommendation. The first one of these, we talked about the Clone Wars. The last one we did turned out not to be so much a recommendation, just so much of a discussion of a spin-off thing, which I want to verify for people who may have listened to that and wondered why we just started talking about that, because we really didn't really recommend it. But we talked about the Ewok. There was 2 Ewok movies made in the 1980s we talked about, and we're going to continue I think this will be a continuing thing, whether we actually recommend these or not. There's going to be discussions of spin-off type material for Star Wars. So today is actually something I've been wanting to talk about on the podcast for a while, and we were going to talk about it the last time, and Andrew is just so excited to start talking about this. We were going to talk about it for the Last Jedi podcast, but for time reasons, we weren't going to have time to watch it and prepare for it. But Andrew mentioned it briefly, and we discussed it very, very briefly in the Rogue One podcast. There was, in 1985 and 86, I think. Yep. There was an anime TV show called Droids. Well, there was a longer title, but whatever, you can look it up. It's basically we can just call it Droids, which followed the adventures of C-3PO, voiced by Anthony Daniels, and R2-D2 as himself, as is said in the opening titles. Yep. It's certainly out of canon now after Revenge of the Sith. It takes place in between Revenge of the Sith and New Hope. It doesn't really fit into the timeline anymore, because it follows basically their adventures with different masters, and they get into different things, and it's almost kind of an anthology type thing where they're just doing different things with these different masters. They have like a 4 or 5 episode storyline with each person, and it was a short-lived show. It had 13 episodes. I'm assuming it would have had more. I don't know if it would have led straight up to New Hope or not, but it had 13 episodes with 3 different storylines, 3 different masters basically. Again, like 4 or 5 episodes for each one. And then they also did in 86 or 87, they did a kind of one-off special, which is a prequel to their 3rd storyline they did. Just briefly, the 3 storylines the first one involves C-3PO and R2-D2 with their master, who who they're basically trying to thwart this criminal gang or whatever you want to say from using this weapon that will allow them to be in control of the other gangs and to destroy planets and conquer planets. The second one involves a prince of a planet, and they're trying to help the prince get control of his planet again and get a firm footing with control of that. And they're fighting against various tyrannical leaders along the way. And the third one involves they're with I think a trader, like who trades goods, not a traitor, but a trader,
not a traitor, but a trader.
A trader who trades goods and stuff, who is trying to find these rare, I just watched this recently, I can't remember now, but I think it's like some rare crystals or something.
Rune stones.
Rune stones that are valuable. And I will say, for full disclosure, because I procrastinate, I did not have time to watch the special. I will say I liked the beginning stuff that I saw. But anyway, The Great Heap, that takes place before the third storyline. It's kind of how, when you start the third storyline in that series, you don't see how R2-D2 and C-3PO meet that master, so that's kind of how they meet him and blah, blah, blah. So I think my first exposure with this show was, I forget how old I was. I was probably somewhere in between 11 and 13 or something like that. And I forget what had happened. I think I had hurt myself or I was sick or something. And basically, my mother let me, because at the time I didn't have a TV or anything like that. Well, we had TVs, but I didn't have like a TV.
Back in my day.
I know. Shut up. Basically, I didn't have a TV of my own. I didn't have like anything to watch movies on, whatever. So my mother and my sister let me stay in my sister's room for like a day and just watch some stuff they had gotten from the library. One was Disney's Black Cauldron, and the other was the Droids show.
Was this on DVD or VHS?
I want to say, for some reason, I don't want to say it's DVD, but it might have been VHS.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
What would the year have been? We're talking the 90s?
No,
late 90s, early
no,
2000s?
It would have been the early 2000s. Early 2000s. Early mid.
The DVD didn't come out till like 2004.
Okay, so unless I was 13, it was probably the VHS. But anyway,
okay, yep.
But the show has never been released entirely on, I don't think, any sort of home video format. They took the second story and the third story, except for one episode of the second story, which they left out. They basically edited the second story together into one feature-length movie and the third one into a feature-length movie. And still as DVD on DVD, that's how you can watch them officially, as is these two movies. And they make some edits to them and change some stuff here and there. So that's how I saw them originally. So I didn't see like all of it, which was really confusing because I was wondering, when I saw it the first time, I was wondering, why are these so long? Because they felt really, not in terms of like I just didn't like them, but they just
Saturday morning.
Yeah, and I don't remember much at all about what my impressions were about them. I remember thinking they were fine. I think I liked them. I figured out while watching them for this that I remembered almost nothing about them whatsoever. I had some images in my head of what the show was. I totally forgot about, I think, all of it because I didn't remember anything in the second and third storylines. But I remember liking it a lot. What was your first exposure to this? Did you watch it when it was on?
I don't recall. I don't remember because it first aired in '85. Yeah. So I would have been 6 at the time. I don't think that I saw it when it originally aired. I know that in I think it was the late 90s, they re-aired them on Sci-Fi. Back then, I think it was called the Science Fiction Network. It was before they made it to the cool SYFY. And so I think that was probably the first time I saw it. Would have been like at my grandma's house watching it because we didn't have cable at home. It was initially part of an hour block of television called the Ewoks and Droids Adventure Hour. And somehow I have a lot more memories of the Ewoks cartoon than I do of the Droids cartoon. Now,
I think that was longer.
There was 2 seasons of the Ewoks cartoon. So I don't know exactly when I first saw the Droids, but I would guess that it was probably that Sci-Fi. And then when they released them on DVD in those mini movie versions in the early 2000s, that's where I have vague memories of this, but I don't like you. I don't recall the actual storylines. So that's the better memory of these.
Yeah. So tell people how excited you were that I suggested that we watch these.
I mean, I was fine to watch them again. I just didn't know what we would talk about.
Well, because I know when we briefly mentioned it in the Rogue One thing, you did not speak terribly fondly of it. It seemed like a thing that had not lived up to any sort of memory of it, nostalgia of it.
Well, so what I did in order to better ensure that I would actually watch all of them, I watched them with my 6-year-old daughter. Because I thought that would be kind of neat to kind of, ease my perspective a little bit, to kind of watch it through her eyes. Because I remember when I watched those DVDs, and it was one of those things where I was like excited to sit down and watch them, and then I got up and did something else, and they were just kind of on in the background because it just didn't hold my attention at all. They are so 80s cartoon.
Oh, they are.
So 80s. I mean, probably that's the biggest recommend that I can give to this, is if you are nostalgic for 80s cartoons, this fits right in with like your He-Man and your Transformers and your She-Ra. It'll feel like you're back in the 80s because they are so 80s television.
Two things before we get more into our thoughts about it. If you want to see the kind of uncut versions of these, if you search for them on YouTube, there's a guy who uploaded the original runs of these, the 13 episodes and the special. And I think, I want to say, I didn't look into it too much, but I think all of the Ewok show too. But the other thing before we get more into our thoughts about it, how did your daughter, how did she react to it?
She loved them. She thought that they were hilarious. She really liked any time that C-3PO, and this happens a lot, anytime that C-3PO does some sort of Three Stooges slapstick, tripping and falling and knocking things over, and anytime he did that, she was laughing. So I guess if you're 5 or 6 years old, you're probably going to find a lot more humor in these.
There was some natural, I think, funny stuff that I think adults could like. Some things here and there, like at one point in one of the stories, I think it's the second one, where C-3PO is doing this kind of con of a prisoner they have. They're trying to get information, and he does this whole bit about, R2-D2 is going to torture the guy, and blah, blah, blah. And so they get information from him. And then when they leave the cell, R2-D2 pokes his head back in and basically does something to scare the guy, which I thought was actually a funny joke. A little funny that was more of a subtle thing they did. But yeah, I think the thing that probably hurts this the most, really, is that it is so geared towards kids. Mm-hmm. And not in a, I mean, because there are kid shows that were, made, well, I'm a 90s kid, so I think of the 90s particularly, but of stuff that is for kids, but it has a mature kind of angle to it. Things I think about first are like the Batman animated series, or
that.
or Gargoyles or whatever. Yes, this is certainly not that in tone or in the way they approach interacting with kids through the show. And that's the thing that hurts it the most, is just the very kid. If they had gone less for I don't know, I almost say it's kind of condescending in a certain way. If they had gone less for the whole kiddified thing, I think it would be better, and it would hold up better too.
I don't think they could have, because I mean, there are all sorts of standards and practices that you had to abide by in order to be on Saturday morning cartoons. You couldn't show like somebody dying on screen, that kind of thing.
Yeah, like nobody ever gets shot with. Yeah. There are the laser, the phasers or whatever. But
they don't even look like guns, right? They can't make them look like guns. They look more like one of them looks like almost like a magic wand.
One looks like a Ghostbusters trap.
Like a proton pack. One of them, a lot of them look more like Star Trek phasers, or like they look like almost like 1980s remote controls for your TV. These big boxes that you hold in your hand, no handles or anything. So yeah, I think a lot of it is just the time that they were made.
So that hurts it the most. And there were a lot of cartoony sound effects there, which are really jarring when they're put right alongside actual Star Wars sound effects. It's just really weird.
Yeah, which I will say that the production value is pretty darn good for 1980s. I read somewhere that the cell rate, so in animation, instead of having frames, right, they have an animated cell where they draw the characters and their motion. You'd have a cell for so many different frames. For Droids and Ewoks, they actually doubled the number of cells that you would have per second to give a much smoother animation. And then, all the sound effects are straight out of, from Lucasfilm and everything. And so I think the production value for the 80s is pretty solid.
And they even have the sound guy for Star Wars,
Ben Bird. He's credited to have written the story by credit for the last arc of episodes.
Yeah.
The stuff with Mungo Baobab.
Yeah, so he had some. Oh god, that name. So he had some influence. He was somewhat involved with it. So I think there's the biggest problem with it is that it's very kiddie, but it feels more at least in tune with Star Wars than like at least especially the second Ewok thing that we talked about.
Yeah.
at least feels, even though it's a very light version of it, it feels somewhat in the same universe of it, because you have the kind of aliens and all that stuff and the kind of design.
And you see some of the ships from the movies, but most of the ships are all made up for the show. But some of the ships, like you see A-Wings and TIE Fighters, and I think you see an X-Wing, even though it's parked, it's not actually moving. You just see it.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, so I think that helps it. How do you actually feel about Anthony Daniels and C-3PO as a character? Because I feel like he is technically a character who could just be insufferable. But I think somehow does work in the movies.
Yeah, and I think he works here too. I think it would be, I mean, it's going to happen eventually, but it would be weird to have somebody else as the voice of C-3PO. I know that there was one episode of, or maybe 2 episodes of the Clone Wars where the original actor of Jar Jar Binks did not voice the Jar Jar Binks character, and it sounds horrible. I mean, you think Jar Jar's annoying to begin with, and then you put somebody else trying to do that, it's just it's wrong.
Yeah.
And I think this will, it'd be the same thing if somebody else voices C-3PO. I mean, eventually you get used to it. I mean, it's like when a new puppeteer comes along for Kermit the Frog. It doesn't sound like Jim Henson, but eventually you just get used to it.
Yeah, you kind of.
But I think, I mean, for now, Anthony Daniels is C-3PO.
And I was initially worried after seeing because I watched the first episode of this, that it was just going to be too much. But they do a good job of kind of, I think, balancing him, because I mean they are the title character. Him and R2D2 are the title characters of the show, but they do a good balance of not having too much of him in there to the point where you're just going to hate.
Yeah, well, and because they aren't the ones propelling the story along. Their masters are the ones who are propelling the story along, and they're just kind of, it's a lot like the movies where
they're the point of view characters.
Right, exactly.
They're the excuse to kind of do this, again, almost anthology type show. I will say, though, they do things, and they do help the plot, and they are useful at certain points. Even C-3PO, who's a bumbling, especially in this, is a bumbling kind of incompetent droid, does do things, which I think is also good, too, because if he was just totally useless, that would have made his inclusion in this very hard to watch. But he does do things right in this at certain points, which is, I think, a smart move that they did. I think out of these storylines, again, not including the special they did, I would rank them as the third one, the first one, and then the second one is dead last. I think the third one, maybe just because it involves the Empire and stuff, I think that was the best, most solid one that they did. The first one is interesting. I like the characters that they had in that. The masters in that, I think, were good. The second one is, I hate that. So I don't hate it. It was just so. It seemed like just the roughest of all of them. Well, the voice acting seemed the worst. The editing seemed bad.
Yeah, I think that. Because I agree with you. I think that I enjoyed the third one the most. Again, probably because of the Empire, and the second was decent. But I think the problem with the third one is that it did not have really an overall arc. Like, there wasn't an overall storyline that started with the first episode of that arc all the way through to the end.
The third one?
The second one. So, the first episode, they find this prince that had lost his memory, and they help him regain his memory. The second episode, they return the prince to his home planet, and he wins the throne. The next episode, I think, is where the pirate starts, and then the following episode after that is a continuation of the pirate storyline. Then the one after that has absolutely nothing to do with anything that happened before.
Which is probably why it's cut out of the movie version of it.
Yeah, and so I think that's probably why I think the second arc is the weakest, because it isn't really an arc.
Yeah, I think it slightly works I agree with you, that is a problem. I think it slightly works in the fact that the episodes, especially the first one, they would end an episode and it would almost seem like, okay, this is going to be the end of that storyline. And then they start the next one. It's like, actually, no, this is continuing. Yep. And they would do that every time. It would work better almost if they formatted them as like a serial, we're going to continue this, but they wanted to wrap every episode up in a nice little,
which makes sense because back in the 80s there were no DVRs, right? And this was a kids show, so if you don't watch Saturday morning cartoons one week, which, I mean, no kid in the 80s missed Saturday morning cartoons, but if for some reason maybe you were out of town on vacation or something, you'd be able to come back the next week and, like a soap opera, would be like, oh, it's just another adventure, same characters.
But yeah, I think the second story helps in that sense, that at least feels, because watching them all together, it is a bit jarring having it be, this is a different end. No, we're going to continue. This is the end. No, we're going to continue. So having the second storyline be more a bunch of different stories with the same characters, I think slightly works. But yeah, it is a bit of a problem, especially the last story, which is just, again, is just kind of, it almost just feels like it was an afterthought, really, because it really doesn't feel part of that other. Yeah, it just doesn't feel part of the other thing. So
all the gizmos that R2 has.
Oh god, yeah,
the propeller and the
like an inflatable thing.
Cushion thing. And,
has a water, has an oil thing, he has a smoke machine.
It's like basically, he has everything the plot needs.
Yeah, and the droids are a lot more flexible in this. At one point, R2 does a dance to a jukebox. He makes droid angels on a snowy planet.
Did we mention that this show was geared towards little children?
Yeah, I don't know if we did. And C-3PO, despite the fact that in the movie he's clearly has an immobile face with a blank expression, his metal face somehow moves. He blinks. Somehow. So yeah, it's very cartoony. They really cartoonify everything. Yeah, it's again very aimed towards kids. I think some of the storylines, kind of in spite of the kidified versions of Star Wars stuff, I think are kind of interesting and work. Again, the third storyline I did get into quite a bit. It's just the fact that it's so towards kids. So, I mean, do you have better thoughts about this now that you've kind of watched it again, or?
Well, I mean, I enjoyed it more than I thought I would, but that's probably because I was watching it with my daughter, and anytime I get to share Star Wars with my daughter is a good time. Would I choose to watch them again on my own? No.
Oh god. Would you recommend it for kids?
Depends on the kid, what they're used to. If they're used to watching modern cartoons, they might not get much enjoyment out of it. My daughter doesn't watch a whole lot of cartoons, so I think she was just excited because it was more Star Wars. But if they've watched today's cartoons and they're expecting more of the same, they might get a little bored with this one, I think.
It's a mix for me because, again, I think there was some enjoyment factor in it. There's
the
somewhat
enjoyment
of a...
for me is that it's very nostalgic for my youth.
And it is, and it is kind of for me too, just because, again, I did watch it originally as a kid, and it does bring up memories of, even though I watched Saturday morning cartoons of a different era, it does kind of bring that to mind. And as a thing that a kid might want to watch today, that you don't think they'll have a problem with it, it's a nice light Saturday morning thing that you can pop on for them to watch or whatever. I mean, so there's some enjoyment factor to me too, and there is some good stuff that they do right in it. So I recommend it in that sense. I partially don't recommend it in the fact that I have a big pet peeve with cartoon shows or animated movies that are condescending or speak down to kids and stuff, because this really, like, it over explains things and it really spells things out for people, which I don't particularly like in a kids medium, because I feel like it treats the kids like they're morons. But in that sense, if you don't want your kid to watch something like that, I wouldn't recommend it. It doesn't speak to the kids on a kind of peer level. It speaks to them as if they're kids who are not as smart as the people making it. Eventually, maybe we'll talk about the Ewok show, but probably not for next not for next time. I haven't seen the Ewok show at all, so I have no opinion on that whatsoever. I know you said you just watched it more.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So, kind of to wrap things up a little bit, we're not going to do another Star Wars podcast until episode 9 comes out, which is not this December, but next December. So there's going to be a little ways in between there. But we're both anticipating that, so I'm excited to get to that show for the finale of not just the sequel trilogy, but of possibly the episode movies as a whole. And again, that will be next December. And maybe Andrew will come back for something else in the meantime. But for now, though, I just want to thank him again for coming on to talk about Star Wars. And next time, we're going to be talking about film noir movies. So I hope to see you guys all again then. And until next time, I'll catch you guys later. Hope you guys all enjoyed that. Please join the discussion below. I'd love to hear your opinions. If you liked this episode, please hit the little like button. And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. A link to my film blog, where you can find text and movie reviews, along with all my video and audio material, can be found in the description below. You can also find me on Twitter at thecinematicpackrat, while I babble on about film and give updates on the status of videos and blog posts. In the meantime, please check out some of my video reviews or other podcast episodes, like the one in the annotations.